Hey, Justin. Happy Friday.
Hey, Ram, how are you? Friday, October 3rd, too. Friday the 13th.
Oh, it is the 13th, isn't it?
It is.
Are you superstitious?
Not in the least. Or at least I tell myself that.
Yeah, I don't think I am either. I'll look at the seasonality around Friday the 13th. If there's any data to support it, then I'll be superstitious. I don't think there's any data to
Yeah.
support it.
No, I'm not superstitious in that. Certainly not in this regard. Maybe with things like sports or something like that. I'll do things that are silly and I'll say I'm not superstitious, but I'll still do superstitious things around that.
Right. If there's no cost to an action, you're wearing your favorite hat, let's say, why not take the hat? you know. So I know we want to
True.
talk a few things today. What do we want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we were talking about this morning that I thought would be interesting is sleep. I think
Yes.
you might have had a bad night's
I had a
sleep.
bad night's
You
sleep.
have young
Oh,
children. Maybe
boy.
you should set the stage for everybody with the
I
age
got
of
three
your three
kids,
children.
2 boys and a girl, 4-year-old boy, 2-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl. And 2 of them woke up last night. It's a double team. And yeah, so I have that sleep headache. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've been on a winning streak this week. Except last night they looked at the statistics and they said, "Look, we gotta get dad tonight." So yeah, well,
That's right.
what are some of your suggestions or tips around sleep
Ooh.
here?
Well, so there's sleep and then there's sleep with kids, right? Different things. I would say first, we sleep trained our kids. That was something that I had never heard of before I had kids. I have 2 boys. They're 11 and 8, going on 9 and 12 in the coming months. It worked. So we
Yes.
got them going, 7 to 7, 12 hours of sleep. And it really was amazing, like life-changing difference. You're
Okay.
outside of the window. So like if you didn't, sorry. If you did, good for you. If you're listening and you have young kids or you plan to have young kids, do it. It really does work.
Sleep
And
training
so
works. The issue
a
is you get
great
off the
sleeper.
wagon when there's travel or something.
Yeah,
Like
travel's really tough.
like you have a holiday, all the routines get kicked out the window. You got to reset them. But
Routine's a good word. I think sleep is all about routine, right? Like there's the teaching your child how to sleep aspect of sleep training, and then there's like creating the routine. I think for me at least, and I've done some research on this because kind of geeked out on some of these things, establishing a routine is important. So like as a parent, you impose a bedtime on your child, and often people don't impose a bedtime on themselves.
oh yeah,
And it's like, oh, I'm just gonna, go to sleep when I'm tired. Well, yes, I did it for years, pulled all nighters, whether it was in the middle of studying or whether it was a trial when I was a lawyer or whether it was kind of like before I had to put together a presentation for a board. And I was like, I'm not done and I need to get it out tomorrow. But I've gotten to the place today where I try to be much more disciplined about
absolutely.
it because I like to wake up early. And I realized that I could make myself wake up early most days of the week, but then I would be dying over the weekend from the lack of sleep if I didn't consistently go to bed. And I used to think, oh, I'll sleep when I die. It's like not a problem. I used to say that all the time. And then I saw some statistics that like I believe a bad night of sleep takes several weeks to recover from in terms of getting your sleep habits back and catching up
Mhm.
on lost sleep. There's no like quote unquote catching up. Like if
Right. There's no sleep
Saturday
debt
you sleep
recovery
in,
concept. That's all mythology. And yeah, sleep
right.
drives performance. It drives mindset. It drives recovery. It's foundational. I agree. I mean, I do my thinking in the evenings. It's quiet when the kids are in bed. That's actually when I would start to read, and it's frustrating because I'm like, oh shoot, like I need to go to bed now. I'd rather just keep reading this because I'm in the zone.
That's why I've reversed it a little. I was definitely not a morning person historically. If anybody knew me, they would be shocked that I wake up early. But now I wake up early, and the solitude of the morning is kind of the replacement.
It's interesting. So yeah, that's a great point. I've been there before with the early wake ups, and I'm more of a night owl, but I have seen that with habit and routine and managing your circadian rhythms with sunlight and all the rest and exercise, you can wake up early. Like this, you can be a morning person. There are chromotypes in the genetics and so forth, but at least for me, I found that I like that. That solitude is exactly the right word. And in the morning, when you have that, if you have 1.5 hours of that solitude, it's beautiful.
I was woken up by one of my dogs last night, actually at 4. She was crying to, I don't know, go out or something. And it was close enough to my normal wake up time that I said, all right, well, I guess I'm just up at 4.
That's a good move. That's a good move. The other statistic I've seen is that if you, like, the snooze alarm is the enemy of good sleep, right? If you try to sleep, you hit snooze for 10 minutes, then for the next few hours, you're just not at your best. You never even got quality sleep anyway, but you sent the message to your brain to start a new sleep cycle. So you're just worse off. And going to the gym is a great idea, even if you had bad sleep, which I did not apply this morning, unfortunately. I woke up, I was like, let me go for that extra hour. Probably should have gone to the gym instead.
Never hit snooze. Never. Yeah. Don't do it. Fight it. And just get up. I mean, easier said than done, but like the habit creates routines, and then routines create outcomes. And so if you get into the habit of hitting snooze, that's what happens. If you get in the habit of just like rolling out of bed and accepting that you don't want to get out of bed, but you're going to just do it anyway, then you do it. So some of the things I think about, just like wrapping up sleep for a bit, I cut off caffeine at like 11 a.m. It's hard. I love coffee, and I actually have a cup of coffee sitting at my desk that I realized I didn't drink in time. And so therefore I will not finish it because it'll just throw me off. I just won't be able to go to sleep the same way. I try to kind of like wind down the lights a little bit, like dim them when it gets later. And I know that if I need to turn up the lights to stay up, like I wish I had done last night when I was watching playoff baseball, instead I ended up falling asleep on the couch because I had dimmed the lights and I was tired.
Right.
And, I take a supplement, usually theanine, that I think.
Oh, yeah, right. It's great. And it's not a hormone like melatonin, which is great.
Yeah, I don't take melatonin. Yes. I don't like that kind of supplement in a way, right. But I do like other ones. I think there's a lot of writing out there. I followed like Huberman talks about some of these things, and I experimented with a few that he recommended. Theanine worked really well for me. It gives you wild dreams usually. So if his warning is accurate, if you have bad dreams, and some people suffer from like more nightmares than not, don't take that one. I don't get, or I very infrequently get nightmares, but I do now have like much more vivid dreams on theanine.
Fascinating. Do you achieve awareness in those dreams, or are they just merely vivid and good recall?
I have had lucid dreams several times where I can control the dream a bit. It doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened. They're very vivid, and I have great recall of my dreams. Not always.
We'll have to talk about lucid dreams at some point in the future. Could do a whole show or interview with a guest on that. That would be cool. Achieved that awareness twice, maybe 3 times, but it is extraordinary, the experience to have a lucid dream when you can create your own reality field and fly. I flew around. I went to like the moon, hung out in Paris. I was actually doing a keto diet, so I had a nice sugary chocolate croissant donut. It was awesome. So Justin and I are into really interesting subtopics and areas.
I know, we're going deep.
Let's move past sleep. There's a lot we could say around sleep. Do I have to tell you about my sleep apnea experiment in a few weeks? I need to get the equipment. More to come on that.
Okay. But, last thing on sleep. Yeah. Sleep mask. Dark as possible.
Visors.
Gotta go with the sleep mask.
Right on. I love your caffeine tip too. I don't drink caffeine after 2, but your rule is better than mine. I'm a slow caffeine metabolizer. But so weight loss drugs, there's this research coming out from Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Jefferies. I'll share one on the screen now. And they're talking about how airlines can make or save money by having less weightful or thinner passengers. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I thought this was fascinating. So there's a lot of talk about things like Ozempic in my social circle because people are rumor mill of like, oh, is so-and-so taking Ozempic? Which at first I was just kind of like fascinated by that people were taking this drug that certainly had the capability to lose weight. They're not like very obese. They're not even obese, yet they were turning to this drug. So like that's a different issue. And there's a whole question of how to do it, whether it's the right thing, how do you do it responsibly? But then the second order effects that are now being discussed, I think are fascinating. So I think Jefferies concluded that if the average passenger lost 10 pounds, a flight would on average be 1,790 pounds lighter, which would result in fewer fuel costs, lower fuel costs, to the tune of $80 million of savings for a major airline annually, which is mind-boggling. And then there are other really, really interesting second order effects that if you start thinking through the possibilities, if people lost enough weight to need to get new outfits, all of a sudden there could be a surge in retail spend because people need to get new outfits. Another one is, if we reduce healthcare costs around obesity-related diseases, could that increase expendable income? I don't know. It's really, really fascinating. I think that we unfortunately have a very obese society, and something like this is necessary. I personally would prefer if people had healthier eating habits and exercise habits to maintain their weight, but reality is that's just not happening for folks, and something like this is really beneficial if somebody really needs that boost to lose weight.
I agree. I just pulled up on the screen here United Airlines operating income. So they did 2.6 million in operating income last year, lost 5 million the year before, lost 9 million year before that. So the takeaway there is if you can generate $80 million in incremental income through a weight loss drug, then that's a big win for you. So it's funny. It's like a cross-sector interaction. Here you have the pharma sector and Novo Nordisk and AstraZeneca and a few others. Eli Lilly are leading on these GLP-1 drugs, and that's why those stocks have done really quite well.
That's right.
They're arguably helping the airlines, but on the other side you have Pepsi. And so one of the analysts asked the CEO of Pepsi about these weight loss drugs because it's going to hurt their business.
Yes.
And I'll try to pull up this, tweet. I had the exchange online. I showed the earnings call transcript, but the CEO tried to dodge it and essentially said, we're going to have more snack foods and different kinds of strategies, which isn't the answer I necessarily want to hear from like a public health perspective either. I was like, oh, you're going to get me some other way. I'm not going to put on the Dorito 2.0 is coming after me.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does reduce food cravings, and I think it reduces total calorie consumption. So as a result, it will reduce spending in food categories, restaurants, snacks, grocery stores, etc. We'll see a decline if there's a wide-scale adoption of drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, etc. And hey, look, if they're peddling foods that are causing obesity, then I think that it's appropriate for their bottom line to be hurt by this and put out healthier foods, maybe.
I totally agree. And they're trying to pivot their offerings to healthier products. This is this is a tweet, by the way. You can see the question from the analyst, and the CEO says, the CEO tries to throw shade on these drugs, actually. So there's a lot of question marks with regard to.
Oh, can you put that back up? I think it. Do we see it? It's tough for me to see, but I think maybe it's now presenting. We're live on a new platform, so I don't know if everybody else sees it.
We'll take a look afterward. Yeah. So, but anyway, I thought that was fascinating. What's also interesting is that there's no obvious way that Pepsi can respond to this other than trying new products. But to your point, if people are snacking less and they have less appetite, it's hard to innovate around. It's a classic innovator's dilemma, but usually happens within the industry, right? When Western Digital hard drives were around, there's a shift to flash memory, but it's in the same sector. So the things you can do to maneuver around that, or like seeing the semiconductor space. This one you can't. What are you going to do if you're Pepsi? And Coca-Cola, and by the way, the stock prices are showing it too. Pepsi has not been doing well at all, and it's substantially underperformed Coke, by the way. So there are differing effects. Coca-Cola has built a different food and beverage products portfolio, although it's not. I don't believe it's terribly healthy. I think Frito-Lay chips are in there.
I think Pepsi's Frito-Lay.
Oh, is that right? Okay, there you go then. Well, hey, look, that supports the thesis then. So Pepsi went long, food products that are addictive and tasty.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if total calorie consumption comes down and you sell calories, what are you going to do? There's just a decreased demand for calories. I guess maybe you could support people having more children so that the total consumption stays.
Yeah, I may have to give it a go. Like, I don't really take pharmaceutical drugs. I take a statin, which we talked about. It's a topic for another time too. That's been relatively new for me. But it might help with fasting. We talked about caloric restriction. It might help psychologically with fasting or fasting adherence. Taking those states of autophagy. So it could be interesting to consider. What else?
That would be. So, are you following the SBF trial? I know we talked about it last week, but
there's a great. So my two ways to follow it. Laura Shin has a daily 5-minute summary, which is fantastic. Recommend giving a look at that. It's the Unchained podcast, and then the second is a thread on Twitter. I think it's Inner Press, and there's some good commentary there, like transcript level commentary. So I've been reading those threads and just doing a few Insta reactions around that. My main headline is that FTX was an incompetent fraud, whereas Madoff was a competent fraud, if that makes sense. I never knew you can make distinctions on kinds of fraud. I guess Enron was a competent fraud also.
The longer it takes to surface, the more competent the longer it takes to surface, I would argue, the more competent the fraudster.
Right. It does raise more questions around diligence, though. I mean, this is so incompetent in so many levels. The mismanagement, the inner company arrangements, the promissory notes, the loans to the management team. So it does raise questions around the VC diligence. I actually want to do an interview with Peter and Jeff, who, as you know, work with us on manager sourcing, manager diligence. These are thick 40-page documents, which are the tip of the iceberg, summarizing all the other diligence work that's done, validating the reps and warranties. There's a lot to do good diligence. That's my main.
Yes. I said I have to do the compliance review of those reports. It's brutal.
Right, exactly.
They're so long.
So what are your observations from the SBF trial?
Well, a brief reaction to your comment. I think, the VC funding market was so frothy that the competition and the FOMO to get into those deals, there was no diligence. I mean, let's be honest, there was none. It was, who's getting in? Can I get in? Okay, I want to get in.
Right.
Take my check. And then because there was such demand, as I've heard it from some insiders, the response was, well, we're not forming a board. You can't get a board seat. So if you want in, these are my terms. And they were accepted, essentially. So that's, obviously that's a yellow flag at the time. And now it's a glaring red flag. I think that one of the interesting things that I read was the way the judge was communicating with defense counsel and signaling certain types of future motions that don't typically come up early in the trial. And I don't know why that's the case. However, it certainly, based on the reporting, has a potential impact on the jury. And that's true, right? Juries look to judges and have a firm belief that the judge has a superiority role to play in the trial, which is true, but they are humans. So we shouldn't forget that, these are humans who can have bad days or not like somebody or, be frustrated. They do their best to always remain unbiased, but, things happen. So it could just be he was having a couple bad days, or it could be he thinks that, the defense counsel really was doing things like being too repetitive or going down avenues that had been foreclosed. Usually there's a little more leeway with cross-examination of witnesses, according to the reports that then was being provided. So I thought that was interesting. I don't think that really is helpful because, maybe are you opening up arguments for SBF on appeal? It probably won't help, but I had that interesting thought. And then the more you see Caroline Ellison, right? That's her name?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. She's the star witness for the prosecution, and obviously she's pled guilty and has cut a deal, so that can impact in how the jury thinks about her and the veracity of her statements, but just really damaging testimony for SBF. I mean, it was very clear that her opinion, as stated during trial, is that Sam Bankman-Fried directed her to do the things that he either denies doing or claims occurred accidentally because, they were building a plane while they were flying it. I never believed that line of argument, and I'm happy to see that insiders are telling what I assume to be the truth. I don't know, obviously, but I think it's damaging testimony, and I think he's not quite realizing the scale of the potential against him, right?
You don't think SBF realizes the gravity of the situation? Is it? I think he does.
I don't think he does. I really don't. I think
like some kind of cognitive dissonance versus that. So I think Caroline's a star witness, but Gary Wang, star witness, former employees, and their testimony is direct, precise, and clear. It is not. There's no need to interpret, right? So one employee was asked why on the first day of the week you said, "Hey SBF, I'm there for you." This is in the summer of 2022 after the 3AC debacle. And the end of the week you left, and he said, "Oh, because he stole customer funds and committed fraud." Like it's all damning testimony coming from everyone. Then you have the back door from Gary Wang. That was at SBF's direction. Yes. And then the infinite credit facility up to $65 billion, right?
Right.
So I think he's looking at this and I think he's coming to terms with, reality.
The reason I think he is not is because if those are true statements, he knew he told Wang to build a backdoor into the customer deposits. He knew he directed Ellison to, prop up FTT token prices. He knew these things. And if he knew those things and he knew that he had created this fraud, he knew he was facing life in prison. I mean, we're talking life. He's a young guy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you knew that, do you try to cut a deal? I don't know if deals were on the table.
You can't. I mean, he's the head honcho. There's no deal cutting with that guy. Right? I mean, he said
you could have cut a deal is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, I expect to be held to account, and I hope that Caroline is also held to account.
Sure.
She cut a deal, of course, but she should face jail time. And,
Yeah. Classic prisoner's dilemma.
Right. What else? I mean, I'd like to see what happens to the parents. What was also revealed is SBF's father is one of these signal chats, and he's informed knowledge about the law. I believe he taught compliance or ethics at Stanford.
Yeah, he's a law professor.
He's a law. So I want to see what
Isn't
happens.
his mother
there.
also a law professor at Stanford?
Correct. She's retired. So the signal chats too. I mean, the screen grabs and Signal. Clearly a lot of that was happening. That's pretty funny to see that. You could say SBF was probably smacking his forehead in the middle of trial. So I thought I told you not to do the auto delete.
Yeah, that's why we use Signal.
Right, exactly. So
hilarious.
What else? But those are good resources.
What a boomer move that is, by the way.
Say again?
What a boomer move, right? To screen grab the
right.
Signal messages.
No, it is more entertaining than I thought it would be. I try to spend a few minutes on it a day just to track it. It is entertaining, though, I have to say. They're interviewing Zach Prince right now, CEO of BlockFi. I saw some of it. Maybe next time we chat, we can talk about that.
Oh, actually, there is one question I wanted to ask you about, because you've tweeted a lot. You were right on top of this, the genesis and the things that were going on. And then some things came out of the SBF trial related to Genesis. Have you been tracking that?
Yeah, so here's what came out. So 3AC blew up Genesis as a whole in their balance sheet. This is going back, call it early July of last year. Mm-hmm. So Genesis starts calling in their term loans. Those are callable loans. You can call them in whenever you want, against FTX and really Alameda in that case. So that a lot of this interviewing, the cross-examination with Caroline Ellison was around that. So, but one of the comments made by Caroline Ellison, and she cited an executive at Genesis who indicated to Caroline that Genesis had solvency risk, had real issues. And that means that Genesis would have obligations to disclose that per the terms of the loan agreement to the creditor. So it's fascinating to see the interactions of these different cases. And it's amazing to see the American legal system process that, actually. All the interactions, they fit together in a nice and neat way. It's slower than I think anyone would like, and probably could be better. Like, why is it that the criminal cases have to line up against the civil cases or the enforcement cases? I think that's one criticism that I've heard that I think I agree with. But yeah, that creates more pressure for Genesis, which of course is under investigation, and has from authorities, SEC, DOJ, and has a lawsuit from the Winklevoss twins. So,
yeah, that's right. I thought based on my reading of it, the timing of the alleged disclosure of liquidity issues at Genesis to Ellison and Alameda undermines some of the public statements that were made by Genesis.
Exactly. Right. So in Cameron's complaint, Cameron Winklevoss's complaint, one of the co-founders of Gemini, he alleges that in October, he had lunch with the CEO of DCG, parent company of Genesis. Mm-hmm. And in that, he was reassured that these were short-term liquidity issues, not solvency issues. And it also creates a stronger link between DCG and Genesis. So Barry Silbert, the CEO of DCG, has been distancing himself from the mess that is Genesis, as he should. That's a good legal strategy. But if you're telling your primary creditor that you have a short-term liquidity issue, it shows that you're informed. Or if you're not informed, then what are you doing having that conversation? It shows some control of the situation. And of course, DCG terminated the executive management team at Genesis and replaced them. So you're going to have hands-on engagement during that period. You don't replace, they need training, reporting, there's board oversight. So more and more questions around DCG Genesis.
Yeah, very interesting. How about bank earnings that are coming out this week? You've always been following those.
Yeah, so big bank earnings came out this morning. They blew it out. I made that forecast on Monday. Not Nostradamus, but it's not that hard to do if you're in the sector and you have a sense of what these banks are doing, the business models, what risks they're taking, and so forth. But JP Morgan blew it out of the water. Disclosure, long JP Morgan. And in Twitter, we have a couple write-ups and summaries of these. So there's no credit event. That's another headline. Where is this credit event people have been talking about on Twitter? Sophisticated, smart people on different podcasts. Listen, there's no credit event. Banks do lending. The biggest banks in the world just blew out earnings. They did not have a credit event. There's no systematic risk. But there are credit events. So credit events are in the multifamily commercial real estate category. It's the smaller banks and regional banks that issue construction financing. And the folks experiencing the credit events are the developers that took out short-term, low-rate loans. Rates went up, the value of the collateral fell, and the net operating income on those assets fell at the same time as remote work was on the rise. So that's where the credit events are taking place.
Yeah, regional banks and community banks are more at risk. They're just more exposed to commercial real estate lending, and the numbers. If 5% of your loans go bad as a bank, you're lost.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Regional banks have real issues and concerns. Are upside down on their funding costs. Right, the big banks, they still borrow at 0%. So it's not true that when rates go up, bank earnings are negatively impacted. It depends on the bank.
Sure.
Right. As you know, no bank is equal. Now, Sheila Bair, the former FDIC chair, she had some comments this morning saying that some regional banks will go away. One, that's breaking news. When a former regulator says that. Second, she says, and that's okay, which is also an important message to share. I agree. I think that is okay.
It is. It's unfortunate, and it's, people will be affected whether they have jobs or they rely on those banks or the community relies on those banks. So it has an impact and it's problematic, but totally agree. I mean, that's the system that we've created, and, businesses, whether they're banks or ordinary corporations, go out of business. And
it's unfortunate that the big banks get bigger. Like JP Morgan needs competition. I would never be a customer of JP Morgan because they pay 0% to depositors. But I'm a JP Morgan shareholder because they pay 0% to depositors. They have no competition. It's a funny, it's not schizophrenic. I'm internally consistent, but I have mixed feelings about this depending on what hat I'm wearing. And we need more competition. We need to revitalize the banking system with capital, external capital that cannot enter due to the Bank Holding Company Act, which you know better than anyone as a CEO of a trust bank and a bank regulatory lawyer by training and practice.
Yes.
And we need technology. That's one area where China is ahead of the US. Their consumer finance system is cashless. Now, their banks have issues and China's got a lot of issues. But the digital money dimension is an area where China's ahead of the US, and they have been for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a big fan of the dual banking system, and I am aware of the constraints you're referring to. It's live. My dogs are at the door. The US is unique globally with respect to the sheer number of banks that we have. People talk about Canada, and somebody once said to me, oh, well, I worked at one of the 6 largest banks in Canada. And I was very young at the time, and I didn't realize there are only 6 banks in Canada, basically. And so the United States has thousands and thousands of banks, and we used to have tens of thousands of banks. And yeah, it's good because they are engines for local lending and local business
Yes.
development. So I don't disagree when you say, hey, JP Morgan needs competition. I don't like that the big banks are getting bigger. However, I don't have a concern that mid-sized regional banks or community banks failing will necessarily really dramatically change the capability of community banking in this country, because there are just so many. And so when banks fail, typically it's an orchestrated windup where another bank, whether it's a community bank or a regional bank, or, depending on the size, a larger bank takes over those deposit accounts and sometimes the branches. And that's a way in which our system, as designed, because we've gone through these failures without a system like the FDIC, has enabled the banking system to stay resilient, even if individual constituent banks have problems. So
Right. Well,
I think we
the
can lose some
question,
banks and still be fine.
right. I mean, the question I would have though is, after that M&A, do the lending operations of the bank stay? Right. So First Republic was a leader in jumbo mortgage origination. Will JP Morgan keep that business? And as M&A happens in the community bank space and regional bank space, will those lending activities stay? That's my main question, because they do differentiate. The kinds of loans JP Morgan makes is very different than the loans that regional banks make. Even between JP Morgan and Bank of America, for example, they'll have different focus areas or types of lending that they'll do. So that's my overall concern.
That's an excellent point. I think that's, the beauty of capitalism, right? And so if those lending operations really were lending to viable opportunities and good borrowers, then I think they'll find a way. Maybe the cost of capital is going up, but the cost of capital is going up generally for everybody right now.
Right.
Not necessarily just because there's been some bank failures, and there will be some bank failures. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to watch. I'm not rooting for any bank failures.
Right.
I do think that, former FDIC chairwoman Blair is probably right that they'll happen.
Right on. I agree. Shall we call her up?
Let's do it. All right. Have a great weekend. Get some sleep.
Take care. Until next time. Thank you. I will. I'll get some tanning. Have a good one. Be well now. Bye-bye.